What's up, Tube? Welcome back to Guido's Chop Chop, second best gel blaster channel on the tubes. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about batteries and soldering more than anything else. So I've got myself a Bossy Lipo here. These are not bad for the price. Probably the best battery to get is Eternity, but the Bossies, they're good for the price. They are a good sort of budget battery. I've used these in a bunch of my blasters and never really had too much of an issue. They've always been good, except we got a slight problem here in that it's got a JST SM connector. These are the little 2-pin black connectors that you see coming standard on a lot of the earlier gel blasters, a lot of the Jingming stuff. Actually, most of the early Chinese blasters had a SM connector, and I mean they were okay for standard blasters, but once you get to bigger and better things, they kind of exceed their current rating. I think they're rated to about 15 amps or something like that. And for the most part of it, they work. They're okay, except they do become a little bit of a bottleneck later on down the track. And most of the time, you are gonna want to cut them off and put something else on. Now, when it comes to deciding what you want to terminate the end of your battery with, there's numerous selections you can have. There's Mini Tamiya, there's XT60, there's Dean's, there's also other ones like XT30, and there's a couple others, but these are really are the main ones. I'm just going to forget about XT30 because it's just an XT60 that's only 30 amp rated, whereas the XT60 is 60 amp rated, so higher amps, more juju. You probably also could be restricted by what blaster you've got. If your blaster's got a Mini Tamiya connector, you might want to change it to a Mini Tamiya connector. I'd be inclined to say no, don't do that, and just change your blaster to a Dean's, and then just go Dean's. Just forget about everything else and go Dean's. That's what I would do, and that's what I'm going to do. And I mean, you could have arguments over which connector is the best and blah blah blah. Every connector's got their own good points and bad points, but for me, what it comes down to in the XT60 versus the Dean's connector is size. It's just a size thing. They're both rated to 60 amps, but in the end of the day, when you have XT60 connectors connected together, you've got a 24mm by 16 footprint, and when you got two Dean's connectors connected together, you have a 16.5 by 13.3mm footprint. So when you're trying to squeeze your batteries and connectors and everything into a small buffer tube and it's tight on space at the best of times, I just go with the Dean's because it carries the same amount of current as XT60, but it's smaller, it's more compact, and it's just easier to deal with. Some people don't like these because they've got their own opinions and whatever. I mean, arguably the XT60 is actually a better design than the Dean's, because it's got, the pins are sort of isolated inside there, whereas here the pins are open, and these little springs can get damaged if stored incorrectly or not taken care of, and some people don't like the tangs on the back where you solder the wires on, and 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Yes, XT60s are great connectors, but something that does the same job and fits in a smaller package, it's a Dean's. Yeah, don't bother arguing, just go Dean's. It's simpler, it's small. That's what it comes down to. It's just fitting it in that buffer tube. It pays to be a bit smaller. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get on to the actual soldering game. So what you want to do is make sure that you don't put this one on your battery. You want to put the female on the battery, and that's a safety thing, just so that, because the battery's always live, you don't want to accidentally be able to drop that on something metal and short it out. That's dangerous. So you always make sure your battery connector is the female of the species, and that goes for the XT60 as well. Despite the fact that the male is, also relatively well isolated, something could potentially fall in there. Always female on the battery. That's the rule. Do it. Alright, let's get into this. To do this, you're going to need a few things. You're going to need a soldering iron, you're going to need some heat shrink, and you're going to need some wire cutters. Now, buy a soldering iron. Get a decent soldering iron. Don't get a $15 soldering iron from Bunnings or whatever. Get a decent soldering station. Here we go, hang on. Alright, I got this, I don't even know what brand it is, Sake. Soldering station here. And I know you're saying, Guido, I don't need a fancy soldering station because I'm only going to solder once in a blue moon. Yes, you do. You need a good soldering station. $15, even a $100 thing from Jaycar isn't going to cut it. It's not going to do the job. And this, I think this cost me like $120 delivered, and it's got everything you need. It's got built into it so you got a temperature adjustable soldering iron, plus you've also got temperature adjustable and fan speed adjustable heat gun for it's for SMD, but it's also useful for shrinking heat shrink and other things. It's there. That's the thing. It's there when you're doing your work and you're soldering. You got your soldering iron there. You're doing your soldering, and then you put that away, and then you got the heat gun ready to go. You don't have to have another separate piece of equipment for a heat gun for heat shrinking. So I recommend getting this. It's no less expensive than a basic soldering iron from Jaycar anyway. Down here you got your temperature for your soldering iron. I like to set it to 350. That works for me. You can have various different tips, but I like to go for one that's relatively thick. I think that's probably like a 4mm. I'd probably usually go for something bigger for a Dean's connector, but that's usually because when I'm doing, no, it's only like a 2.5. There you go. Usually when I'm doing Dean's, I'm doing much thicker wires. So for these thin wires, I don't need all that much temperature, but I like to have a thick blade on the soldering iron just to get that heat transfer done quickly and efficiently. The wider the blade, the more heat transfer you get into the wire and into the connector, and that's what you need when you're soldering. If you're trying to use like a real thin, skinny tip and you're trying to solder thick wires, it's not going to work. You're going to have a bad day. Alright, I'm just going to get this out of the way so we can see what's going on in the soldering iron area here. While we're talking about getting equipment, here's another little bit of gear you probably want to get your hands on. Just a little helping hand work clamp, and one of these as well. If you don't have one of these, even if you're not planning on doing any soldering or tech work on your batteries, get one of these. I'm going to put some links to all this shit in the description. You should have one of these. Lipos are no joke, and you always want to make sure that they are safe. And this is a Lipo Checker. It's got a very loud beeping alarm that will let you know if the thing is faulty. So that's the beep there. So this is going to run through your battery voltages. I don't know if you can see that on camera, but this is 11 volts, so it's 3 cell, saying 11.6 volts. First cell is 3.8, second cell is 3.8, third cell is 3.8, and they're all 11.6. So that tells me that this battery, which I've just pulled out of the box, is pretty good, and it's on a storage charge, so 3.8 volts per cell storage charge. This is a thing. This is only like $2, I think, to have this, and it's worth having. You don't want to over discharge or overcharge a Lipo. It's bad news. You will burn your house down. It's not a game. Make sure your Lipos are safe. All right. And having said that, now we're going to cut the wires off it. Now, as I said, these are a battery. These are live. There's no off switch on a battery. Batteries are always live all of the time. So when you cut these off, make sure you only cut one wire at a time. So red wire first. Well, it doesn't matter which one first, but just make sure that you only do one at a time, and then don't allow them to come into contact with each other. You don't want to short. You don't want to short them out. That's bad news. Nobody wants that. Alright, and now from here on in, I like to deal with one at a time, because what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to like trim away about 4 millimeters of insulation off the end there. And now that that's exposed, I don't want this one exposed. I mean, it already is exposed a tiny little bit there, but I mean the insulation kind of is keeping it somewhat safe, whereas this one's completely exposed. I like to give this one a little bit of a twist just to keep the wires together. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start soldering this. Now, you can clamp this in your little clamp to hold it still. I don't like to do that because I like to use the clamp to hold the cable later. But I just, particularly with these batteries where the wire's not very long and it's not going anywhere, you don't really have to clamp it. Now the next process is to clean the wire. Make sure that the wire is clean. You can do this with isopropyl alcohol. More often than not, a lot of the wires we're dealing with are pretty high quality wires. Even the ones from China. They're pretty high quality wires, and more often than not, if you're stripping a new bit of insulation off, you don't need to clean them. They're pretty clean. The flux in the solder does a pretty good job. So I mean, unless your wire's particularly dirty, I don't really bother with that step that often. But yeah, if your wire is a bit dirty, you might want to clean it with some isopropyl alcohol. Get your solder. I've got a 6040 solder from Jaycar, just a standard solder here, and you want to make sure that your soldering iron tip is clean. The damp sponge is a good technique. Some of the irons come with one of these sort of metallic, sort of scrapey type ones, and that works as well, although I find the damp sponge generally works better. But once you've got a nice clean tip, what you want to do, let me get you right in there. So what we're going to do now is tin the wire and start off by tinning your tip of the soldering iron. And what you're trying to do now is create a little bridge of heat transfer with the liquid solder that you're on here. Usually I would do this a whole lot quicker than this. I'm doing this really slowly, so because I'm talking my way through it at the same time. But generally speaking, what you want to do is get it done as quick as possible, minimal heat, or I mean, you want to get a good heat transfer so you've got the iron on the piece for the minimal amount of time possible, because you don't want to put a whole heap of heat into this, because this is a lithium battery, don't forget. So yeah, tin this. You want to make sure you're getting a good thermal bridge between the end of the iron and the wire, and then apply the solder, in this case it's flux core solder, to the wire, not to the iron. So you use the iron to transfer heat into the wire, and then the wire to melt the solder, and also because it's a flux core, the flux will clean the wire. If you don't have flux core, you can dip it in flux beforehand, but these days most wires flux core. Some people argue that the flux core is not as good, and that is probably true, but it's sufficient for our purposes. Tin the wire. Work with gravity. This is a liquid. When you put the solder onto the iron, it becomes a liquid, so you'll see it will drip. So don't try and solder uphill, if you know what I mean. Like, don't put the soldering iron underneath and try to solder uphill, because it's, you're gonna struggle. You want to heat and allow the solder to flow into the joint, or into the wherever you're trying to apply the solder. Don't try to push it uphill. You're gonna make life hard for yourself. But yeah, so basically we tin our negative, and then we're gonna bring in our Dean's connector here, and the negative on the Dean's connector is this one here. It's actually got a little positive and negative marked on it. Positive there, negative there. Yeah, I like to think of it, if you're putting the terminal down like that, the one that looks like a negative symbol is the negative. It should stand to reason, I guess, but it does have a little mark in there, positive and negative. So I'm just going to whack that into my little helping hand clamp, and then I'm going to tin that bad boy for you as well. So same process, clean the tip, make sure this is clean. This is already pretty clean, so we should be pretty good to go. Get a bit of solder on there, on the tip, just to give it a good bridge. Apply the heat, and then get the solder in there onto the terminal there. Once they're both tinned, we're basically ready to go for the next step, which is attaching the wire to the terminal. We want to get the piece of heat shrink that we're going to use on there first, because it's real hard to get the piece of heat shrink on after you've soldered it. So we'll get a bit of heat shrink on there. Alright, so I'm going to put a piece of black heat shrink on because it's negative. A little while back I sort of made myself like a self-implied rule that I would just use black heat shrink on everything, because I got sick of having the wrong coloured heat shrink. I try to go red for red and black for black, but then I'd end up always running out of red heat shrink, or running out of black heat shrink, or then having green heat shrink, and what the hell's this blue heat shrink just like randomly here for some reason. And so now I just pretty much only buy, for a long time I only bought black heat shrink, but I've got some red stuff now, so I'll use black and red. Alright, again, tinning the tip, making it nice and clean, tinning it, making sure there's a good way to heat transfer, and then basically applying the wire there, applying the heat bridge to the wire, and then allowing that heat to flow into the terminal as well. And then you pretty much don't have to add any more solder at that point. That's that's good to go. And then you can slide your heat shrink over the top of that, and if you are lucky, you'll get it over there in one go, and then you can just pick up your heat gun, which is all ready to go because it's on your soldering station, and then good to go, ready to go for the next one. And I mean, we're going to follow the same process for the next one. Just take a bit of the insulation off, twist it, clean it if required, clean our iron, tin the tip, apply the solder to the wire, not to the iron, allow it to flow downhill, clean the tip again, put that away. I'm going to reorientate this a little bit, just because for ease of soldering. Now, with these Dean's connectors, it's probably best to go positive first because of just the orientation of it. Because I like to put the wires in the middle, like down here. It doesn't much matter. You can put it on the outside with a thin wire like this, but if you're using a thicker wire, they should go on the inside. So probably easier to go positive first because it'll give you that little bit of leeway here. When you're soldering, you won't have the negative wire in your way, but it doesn't matter to me because either way works. Alright, I'm going to get some heat shrink, pop it on that. Alright, this is an excessive amount of heat shrink for the size of this terminal, but I bought like a little kit of heat shrink like this, and it comes in pre-cut sizes, so you know, whatever. Alright, get that nice and clean, tin it up again, get that positive wire down in there. And that's where doing the positive first probably would have helped, just because when you're behind a tripod and trying to solder underneath the other wire, probably should have done the positive first. Either way, if you're really struggling, you can just flip it over and do it on the other side. It's probably not recommended, but who cares, right? No one's gonna know. And again, pop our bit of heat shrink on there, grab our heat gun that's already ready to go because it's on our soldering station. Heat that up, and we're done and dusted, ready to use our Dean's connected battery. Hopefully that's been useful to you guys. If not, I'm telling you how to suck eggs. Oh well, you know. a lot of people don't know how to solder, and I think it's a skill that you probably should know if you are doing any sort of work on gel blasters. Alright, that's it from me. Thanks for watching. Don't forget you can buy a patch. Hit me up on Facebook. And if you are enjoying what's going on here, you can buy me a coffee in the link down below. And thanks for all those people who have bought me coffee. Shout outs to Adam Hoy, Davin Evans, Dazza the Kid, Seeker, Joel. Thanks for buying me a coffee. You guys are legends. Don't forget also, if you are wanting to buy something from Tactical Edge Hobbies, you can get 10% off with my discount code LOGUIDO. I'll put that all in the description. Peace.